Hello, my friends. Welcome to Origins. My name is Donn Chapman. It's my privilege to be your host. You know, Origins is a forum where we use the evidence of science to validate the truth of creation. We have a great guest for you today. Dr. Vardiman is a PhD from Colorado State University in atmospheric science, and he has been very busy in the whole field of science. He is the research coordinator and chairman and professor of astrogeophysics at the Institute for Creation Research. I'm so glad to have you here. I'm really excited about the work that you do. I can't imagine a more timely subject for us today than the subject of global warming. And you have expertise in this issue and have given a great study. Your background is in studying the atmosphere.
Right. I have studied atmospheric science now for about 35 years. So I have a lot of background and a lot of research that I've done in this area.
I guess the first thing we need to talk about is how do we get accurate data? It's really hard for me as a layman to separate what's propaganda and what's real data. Where are we getting our data that we look at to decide if there really is global warming?
Yeah, that's a real tricky one, even for the scientific community. Scientists, by and large, trust other scientists in terms of the data that they collect and the way they interpret it, and many of them are not experts themselves. So that's why this has become such a big issue. You have to go back to the basic data, and that's where many of us are not. And even the scientists themselves have become politicized because of this lack of going to the sources themselves.
So if you were going to one place for a source, where would you go?
Well, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, commonly known as NOAA, is the main source for weather information. NASA also has a lot of information from their satellites and other sources as well. So there's places on the internet where they put their data that you can actually go to, and that's what I've done.
And all of us can trust that data.
Yes, that data is very good.
Now I have a picture here, I think you can pull it up on the screen, of your summer home in Hawaii, is that right?
No, that's not my summer home.
Oh.
It's a nice place. This is Mauna Loa Observatory on the big island of Hawaii. There's actually 2 volcanoes on that island, and the observatory that we're looking at there is on Mauna Loa, one of those.
Okay. And why is that such a significant place?
Well, this is really the place that the observations of carbon dioxide were taken starting back in 1958. And it's the basis of much of this global warming controversy. It was actually started, a brainchild of Dr. Roger Revelle, who was the president and one of the founders of the University of California at San Diego. And he hired a young scientist by the name of Keeling to set this laboratory up there in Mauna Loa back in '58. And he did this with the anticipation that there might be a problem with carbon dioxide. He put it on Mauna Loa because it's out in the middle of the ocean, a long distance from any nearby source of carbon dioxide. It should therefore represent as best as possible the global average carbon dioxide.
And you believe it pretty well does that?
Yeah, I think so. There's only a few times you have to make some corrections, and that's when the nearby volcano spits out a little CO2,
Sure.
and you can separate that out by the limited time that occurs and by wind direction. But generally, it should measure the average condition.
Now you have a chart that shows us the result of that. I'd ask you to go up to the screen and begin to show us that if you would.
Sure. The measurements that were taken at Mauna Loa are shown on this chart here from about 1958 up to the current time. And you can see that it starts in the lower left-hand corner of the picture here. Back in 1958, and okay. The value there is about 315 parts per million, carbon dioxide parts per million of air. And over the last 35, 40 years or so, up through about 2003 or 4 this data goes to, it's actually gone up to a value of around 380. That's a 20% increase from 1958. Now, in that increase, you also see these little wiggles up and down here.
Yes, sir.
Which is rather interesting. Because,
they're pretty consistent through the whole pattern.
Yes, and that's an annual oscillation that's produced because as the ocean warms and cools throughout the year, the microorganisms that grow in the ocean will grow in the summertime and absorb carbon dioxide, and it reduces the rate. And then in the wintertime, when they die off, they don't absorb as much and actually release carbon dioxide. And so you get this oscillation. This is the basis, actually, for Al Gore's book that he put out recently, An Inconvenient Truth. The whole basis of his concern about global warming is based upon this diagram and the concern that this is going to produce increased heating. An interesting comment that he made was he was impressed by that graph, not so much by the increase, because when he was taking a class, that was just beginning to be noticed in a very narrow part back at the beginning, but he noticed this oscillation annually, and he actually got the impression from the professor that this was the Earth breathing.
Now, we don't want to do a show on Al Gore, but as a pastor, there's red lights going off in my brain saying, boy, this sounds like pantheism.
Yes, I think there's certainly behind all of these various concerns, that issue is there. It's not a dependence upon God taking care of us and providing a stable environment for us to live in.
Even his comment that the earth has a fever, like it should be our child that we want to take care of. Again, it's giving human qualities to an inanimate object.
Yes. That's why I thought that statement was so revealing.
It's really scary.
Over the last 10 or 15 years, I've been studying this problem, and just this last year decided I needed again to go back and look at the basic data. And so I went to some data provided by NASA and by NOAA on the internet, and if you know where to go and how to pull down the data and interpret, you can come up with these same results. One of the first things I did to confirm whether in fact the atmosphere is actually warming or cooling or what it's doing was to look at some buoys that are located in the Gulf of Alaska. This particular buoy is located in the Gulf of Alaska right here.
Though all of those little squares are buoys that are out there in the ocean recording data for
That's
us.
right. They're all recording data. Some of them have been there for up to 35 years. That's one of the reasons I selected this particular buoy, because it had the longest record. But they're located all over the Gulf of Alaska, up in the Arctic, and out in the Atlantic as well. All around the northern hemisphere in particular, we have buoys. If you were going to do an analysis of all the data that's available with all the buoys, you're talking about a massive project.
Yes.
And so I decided to just kind of get a test case on a limited location to see what it would be like, to see what the hints were. So I selected this particular buoy. Now this buoy takes not only sea surface temperature, it takes air temperature and a number of other quantities like pressure and precipitation and so on. But I was particularly interested just in the sea surface temperature. And here's what the data looked like from about 1976, looks like, up to about 2005. Now, and the vertical axis on the far side there is the sea surface temperature in degrees centigrade. Along the lower axis is the time in years from 1975 to 2005. And you can see the oscillation of the sea surface temperature. In the summertime, you're going to reach a very high temperature up in these regions here. And in the wintertime, you get quite cold. And it oscillates over a very wide range. So you've got a lot of noise in this data. But if you take an average over that whole graph using what's called a least squares method, which is a standard mathematical technique to try to get the average, you can fit a straight line through that data, and you'll notice that from 1975 to 2005, that's 30 years, that the temperatures basically increased from about 7.5 degrees centigrade to about 9 degrees centigrade. So that's about a 1.5 degrees centigrade. That's about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, you can see the oscillation varies all over the place. There's some short-term variations in there as well as the annual oscillations, but there is a general trend upward for the last 30 years.
Probably the wrong term, but is that like a mean temperature that would be?
A mean temperature for each year, but
yes,
over the whole lifetime of that data.
And it's up to, in Fahrenheit, just about 3 degrees.
About 3 degrees over that period of time. So we've had an increase on the order of about 3 degrees in the average surface temperature for that one buoy in the Gulf of Alaska.
Okay.
Now there may be data from other buoys and other locations that will be different, but from that one buoy we got a hint that there has been some apparent warming.
Okay.
Well, there's some other features that we can look at as well, and this is one that's most interesting to me because the temperature of the sea surface will cause hurricanes to intensify and become more frequent. This is Hurricane Floyd back in September of 1999, but we can look at the data. We actually have about a 150-year record of the frequency of hurricanes that have occurred in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Caribbean, coming into the southeastern United States. Now, we have records of this data also from other places around the world, but this is of most interest to us. And in fact, we've been concerned the last few years that the hurricane frequency seems to have increased dramatically. But look at the data here. Now, the vertical line on the vertical coordinate on the left there is the number of storms per year that exceed 39 miles per hour. That's the threshold for a tropical cyclone. Okay. So this includes any storm that's faster than that, from about 1850 to 2000 and on that order. Well, you notice that an extreme variation. You have the highest record here, at least up until recently, was something on the order of 21 hurricanes in 1 year that occurred at 39 miles per hour or faster. You've got some years in which the frequency is down here on only 1. It's all over the place. But if you also look at the variation, there are periods of time in which it's very, very low, yes, and then other periods in here in which it's relatively high. So there's a tremendous amount of variation. In fact, if you look at this, from about 1960 through about 1990, this period in here is also relatively low, and then suddenly in the last few years it's gotten quite high. That's a rather sudden change. But on the average, you have an increase of hurricane frequency over that whole trend over 150 years. So this would imply that we may have some global warming effect that's been going on for the last 150 years.
Oh, is that right? For 150 years?
That record is about 150 years there. Okay. So that's interesting, isn't it? Now, there's another thing. It turns out that also if you have hurricanes that are growing on warm sea surface temperatures, they can also get much bigger and last a lot longer, in addition to just having higher wind speeds, so you can have a lot more devastation and a lot more influence. It turns out that the devastation from a hurricane is proportional to the square of its wind speed. So if you double the speed of a hurricane, it's going to have 4 times as much damage produced. So that's a very significant fact. Okay, we have another issue that's commonly in the news today, and that has to do with the amount of ice coverage in the Arctic. Here's a diagram showing in the purple line here. You'll notice this is what the coverage was a few years ago, and in 2006 the coverage is this white area.
So there's a definite shrinking there.
For that particular year, it's much less than it was previously. But here's a graph of what it's looked like for the last, since about 1980, just a little before 1980, and you'll notice that again, here we have the aerial extent of the sea ice. This is in millions of square kilometers in the Arctic Ocean, measured by satellite coverage. That's why we only have data back to about 1980, because we didn't have satellites that could do that before that time. Over the period of time up to about 2006 or so, you'll notice the oscillation. In the summertime, again, the ice coverage is decreased in the summertime. That's a smaller area. In the wintertime, it's higher. And again, it oscillates up and down, but you do have a consistent downward trend of the ice coverage.
We have to go to a break, Doctor, but when we come back, I want to go over what your conclusions are from that evidence, and then maybe take-homes for our people on where are we with global warming, is it our fault, and what can we do about it? You won't want to go away. This is a subject that all Christians need to talk about, all folks need to talk about, global warming.
Creation versus evolution. You weigh the evidence. The hummingbird, a marvel of creativity. The ruby-throated hummingbird is one of the most fascinating creatures of all creation. No other bird can fly forward, backward, upside down, and straight up like a helicopter. Gram for gram, the hummingbird has the greatest energy output of any warm-blooded animal. Conserving its energy, it can travel 500 miles non-stop over the Gulf waters to Mexico. Is the hummingbird a product of random chance processes
from our break here with Dr. Larry Vardiman, who is talking to us about global warming. And he's just said, yes, in fact, that he does see trends that shows that the ocean water is warmer, the ice cap is smaller, and the frequency of hurricanes is more frequent than it used to be. Is that true?
That's right.
And so when you look at that data, then we begin to make conclusions. Dr. Vardiman, lead us now. What are the conclusions that you would have us believe?
Okay, well, first I would say that, yes, global warming has been occurring over at least the last 30 to 50 years. That this warming may only be a short-term fluctuation. You noticed in some of the data, it's got long-term and it's got short terms as well.
I saw that especially in the hurricane thing. There was a 1960, 1970 when we had kind of reversal of the trend for the rest of it.
Right, so there's all kinds of periods in there that you have to be aware of. Yet this evidence is still inconclusive that the recent changes are anthropogenic. Now that means caused by man.
Well, there's two questions. Is there global warming, and are we causing it? And those are very separate questions.
That's right. And I for one, don't believe that we're the cause of it. And I'll get into that in just a moment.
All right.
There really is no accepted idea of natural causes for the recent warming other than random climate fluctuations. Everybody says it could go up and down. But these have not been confirmed in terms of any natural causes either. There is a new theory, though, that I'm quite intrigued about and want to explore further, and that is that galactic cosmic radiation, which is modulated by our sun, the solar activity on our sun, affects low-level cloud cover on the Earth, and therefore global warming should be explored due to this. In other words, the sun, its various levels of energy may actually be causing this short-term and long-term fluctuations in warming on the Earth.
What makes you think that might be happening?
Well, there is some evidence now that says that global warming is really true and that it has been tied to fluctuations in sunspot activity. Now, there's been attempts to do this for probably 40, 50 years or more, trying to relate fluctuations in our climate due to sunspot activity. And we haven't been successful in being able to demonstrate that until just recently. Within the last 5 years or so, there's been a number of people, particularly in Europe, who've been able to show that there is a direct correlation between sunspot activity and the cosmic radiation that comes to the Earth causes clouds, which in turn reflects the radiation from the Earth. It's a little bit complicated, as you can see how I'm trying to explain this, but basically the idea is when the sun is active, the Earth is going to get warmer, not just due to the direct activity, but because the sun deflects the cosmic radiation coming from space when it is active, and therefore clouds are not produced as much, and the solar radiation can come directly in and cause warming.
And you're looking at that evidence, and while you're not ready to say absolutely this is true, it's evidence that you are saying this is at least worth a lot of study.
Yes, I think it's an outstanding approach to understand why we're getting this global warming. Another factor is that there's a lot of evidence that shows that the so-called CO2 connection is not really the cause of it. For just example, one of these is that it turns out that plots of changes in carbon dioxide in the past lag increases in temperature. In other words, the global warming happens and then the carbon dioxide increases.
Right.
And that makes sense.
So it's more an effect than a cause.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
And it makes sense because the ocean has thousands of times more carbon dioxide in it than the atmosphere. And it's also very sensitive to a slight temperature change. You increase the temperature of the ocean just a small amount and it will release a lot of carbon dioxide. And that seems to be showing up in the climatic records that we have.
Dr. Vardiman, is carbon dioxide a pollutant? Isn't it a natural thing that we need for the cycle of life on the Earth?
Yes, it is. I don't think it should be looked at as a pollutant. In fact, as you well know, when we breathe in oxygen, we're breathing out carbon dioxide. On the other hand, plants take in carbon dioxide and let out oxygen. So it's a natural part of our life processes. It's not a pollutant, it's not a poison, it's a natural part of life.
But isn't there legislation being written that calls it a pollutant?
Yes, that's one of the controversies. There's a suit before the Supreme Court, and they're called upon to decide whether the Environmental Protection Agency will be required to regulate carbon dioxide. And that is based upon the idea that it's a pollutant.
Which isn't true.
That's right.
So we're making bad law based on bad science. What we're saying, what we know is true from science, that this is a natural part of life, we're calling it something that isn't a pollutant. Is that fair to say?
That's exactly right.
So is global warming our fault? And is it because of carbon dioxide? And what do you think about that?
I don't think it's our fault. I think that what we're seeing is a fluctuation in the average atmospheric temperature, and it's caused by the sun.
Okay.
The sun is actually the driving mechanism which causes the Earth's climate to warm or cool, and the carbon dioxide is a consequence of that driving of the change in temperature.
You're saying there is a global warming, but you're not saying we need to be that alarmed.
That's right. I'm one who believes that we should take care of the environment. I believe that we need to keep it clean. I think we've violated the principles of being good stewards over the last 50 years. So I think we need to be good stewards, but we shouldn't get so carried away that we're going to destroy our economy and our whole culture just because of something that I don't even think is the cause of the problem.
We could give up everything that's dear and has enriched our standard of living, and global warming could just continue if it's happening because of sunspots.
That's right. I don't think we can even have an effect that's going to produce any result.
One of the questions that I would want to ask you from your expertise is if we have viewers who want to look at this deeper from a Christian perspective, what would you suggest that they read, or where would they go to look?
Well, there's two sources that I would recommend. One is the website for the Institute for Creation Research, from where I'm at. I've written probably 6 or 8 impact articles. The latest one was in April of 2007. And you can find that on our website at www.icr.org, and just look for global warming, or my name if you wish. The other one, believe it or not, is on YouTube. There is a video on YouTube called The Great Global Warming Swindle, and it gives you all kinds of reasons why carbon dioxide is not the culprit here, and goes into also the possibility that the sun, with its increased activity and reduction in activity, is the driving mechanism for global warming.
Okay, well, so you're going to send us to YouTube, and you're going to send us to the Institute for Creation Research website, and there we're going to find some interesting facts that are going to kind of buffet what you've been teaching us today.
I hope so.
Well, it's been a tremendous blessing and pleasure having you here. I know we've given our folks a lot of good things to think about. You know, folks, I just want to say to you as we close our show today that it's so important that you put your faith in God. You know, I think it's always been a tendency of man, perhaps clear back to the Tower of Babel, to put a little more importance on ourselves than perhaps we have, to think that we have control over things that ultimately are in the control of God. Certainly we need to be good stewards of planet Earth. God put us here to have dominion over the earth and to do it in such a way that He was glorified. Ultimately, it's not the earth, it's the God who made the earth who is our provider. And so I urge you to continue to look into this subject, but do it from the perspective of understanding that we have a Heavenly Father that loves us. He's the one who provides for us, and He's the one who will determine the temperature of planet Earth. And so, again, remember, God created you. It's His view that He made you, and that should be your worldview too. So we hope to see you again as we ponder these great thoughts of creation here on Origins. See you next time.
Watching this edition of Origins. If you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint information presented today, you can download a PDF file of program number 803 from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins program number 803, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.